the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with chief conversationalist Bill Kenney, featuring Matt Ardill, with special guest Deremy Dove. And now, curator of the hall, your host, JD.
Thank you so much, Kirk Lane. It is an absolute thrill to be with you here just outside the SNL Hall of Fame, here for the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. I am fumbling with my fob to get into the hallowed halls, and here I go, crossing the threshold. Make sure as you follow me to use the mat, my friends, and wipe your feet. The SNL Hall of Fame podcast is a weekly affair where each episode we take a deep dive into the career of a former cast member, host, musical guest, or writer and add them to the ballot for your consideration. Once the nominees have been announced, we turn to you, the listener, to help decide who will be enshrined for perpetuity in the hall. And that's how we play the game. It's just that simple. Listen, if you're a fan of Pop Culture 5, you're going to love the back-to-back that we just did. Last week, we talked with former chief conversationalist emeritus, Thomas Senna. And this week, we have his cohort, Deremy Dove. This is bananas. It's a whole podcast in 2 weeks represented on our show. If you're not listening to Pop Culture 5, get after it. Come on. Let's go talk to our friend Matt about what we're getting up to this week in the hall.
Today I'm rollerblading down the hallway to meet Mr. Ardill, but I am unsure how to stop these wheeled sneaker-like death traps. It's a good thing the pole vaulting mat is still set up. Oh, Matt!
Oh, JD, watch your head.
Yeah, well, that's why I wear the Hemlet, you see.
There you go. Good thinking. That's why you're the boss.
That's right. Hey, curator. So, I got to tell you something. When I was a kid and I was watching SNL, and I closed my eyes and I thought about cool, our next nomination was that to me. And that was Dennis Miller. He was one of the first people I thought was cool. I thought of him the same way like I thought of Fonzie. Like it was just, he was just sort of cool. He had longish hair and
I had that exact same feeling as a kid growing up. It was just like, this is like cool, intellectual, kind of anti-establishment dude. Yeah. Well, you ready for some trivia about Dennis Miller?
I sure am.
All right, 5'9", born November 3rd, 1953 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He grew up in Castle Shannon, attending St. Anne's School, a Catholic elementary school, before attending Keystone Oaks High School, where he began his class clown trajectory, eventually attending Point Park University as a member of Sigma Tau Gamma. So another frat boy. He fell in love with comedy at a very young age when he saw Kelly Monteith as a child. Monteith answered Miller's questions about becoming a comedian, and a career was born. It lay largely dormant until 1979, when he watched Robin Williams' HBO special and decided, I want to do that. Miller has 21 writing credits, 14 producing credits, and 29 acting credits. He started working the grind at small clubs, saving $1,000 to move to New York to make it big. And if you do the calculations, it's still only about $6,000 today. And it was still pretty expensive back in 1979. Once in New York, he hit the ground running, renting a room which cost him $700 of his $1,000 in savings, which, proportionally is about the rent of a New York apartment now. But he immediately started seeing a bit of success. He submitted a joke to Playboy magazine that won the 1979 Joke of the Year. The joke was, the only difference between group sex and group therapy is that in group therapy, you hear everyone's problems, and in group sex, you see them. He then hit the contest circuit and, in fact, landed himself a spot on the New York Laugh-Off contest. There were only 8 slots available, the other 32 already taken by seasoned New York professionals. And he was up against some of the hardest, hottest comics who had well seasoned and presented themselves. He made it to the finals. He got a spot. He made it to the finals. And then he was listed by Hustler magazine as one of the 10 funniest people in America you'll never see on TV. Little did they know he was soon to be on TV. He moved back to Pittsburgh, took a gig doing warm-up for a local TV show before moving to LA and making it big on Star Search, like Arsenio and a lot of other talented comedians of the day. He then moved on to SNL, but after leaving SNL, he began a more political commentary, taking that energy from the desk and moving it into shows that now are sort of similar to the domain of Bill Maher, and progressively swung more towards a libertarian kind of politics. Now, while doing the political commentary, he was also the host on Monday Night Football, where he would offer color commentary and political commentary. His brother is, in fact, the agent of Jim Carrey, so he's going to showbiz family now. He once said, "I used to be a skeptic, but not anymore, because now I am positive that I'm getting screwed." So, which kind of sums, Dennis up in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a tasty nutshell you've given us there, Matthew Ardell. Let's go down to the conversation room where Deremy Dove is. I don't know why he's got a fan and he's fanning Bill Kenney's forehead, but he seems to be doing that while Bill Kenney enjoys a delicious Arnold Palmer. Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Matt and JD. Welcome into the conversation. I'm so excited to be here today talking about one of my favorite cast members of all time, one of the most unique cast members of all time, Dennis Miller. And to join me to talk about this, I'm thrilled to be joined by the co-host and the star, let's be fair, of the Pop Culture 5, Deremy Dove. Deremy, how are you today?
Bill, it's such a pleasure, man. I've been seeing you on so many different Saturday Night Live podcasts and always respect what you have to say, respect your unique point of view. And I've been jealous of Thomas. I'm like, hey, man, you're on with Bill. You're on with all these people. I got to get in there and get my SNL on. So thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And respect goes right back to you because I've enjoyed your takes here on the SNL Hall of Fame. You had a great one with Tracy Morgan a couple seasons ago. I really enjoyed. And of course, you're over at Pop Culture 5. As I said, you guys have had some great conversations. I was telling Thomas just last week about like how much I enjoyed your Seinfeld episode. Curb Your Enthusiasm. You guys have done some really great topics, and I've been pressuring him to get me on the show. So maybe now that I'm talking to the star of Pop Culture 5, we can work that out.
Oh, we're definitely going to make it happen. Now that you're talking to me, it's a lock, man. We're going to be on Pop Culture 5 for sure.
So what do you guys have going on over there, and what's coming up?
Yeah, so we have so much going on. I love doing the show with Thomas, and I think 2025 is starting off great where we have different episodes as far as music, where we're doing ones as far as Biggie. We've done Linkin Park recently. We have Pharrell coming up, just different kind of musical artists. But then we also have, I think Aerosmith as well is going to be coming up. But we've done great movie episodes. We did a really interesting one on David Lynch. So essential David Lynch movies. And I think we both were surprised on how long we were able to go about David Lynch and his impact, but also his films. We're going to have an Al Pacino movie episode coming up. So, and also one that I'm thinking about with you is we're going to have around Mother's Day, Women of SNL episodes. So essential female cast members on SNL. So we have a lot of fun things coming. So I'm just really excited for Pop Culture 5.
Yeah, you guys have really kind of covered the swath of everything pop culture, and that's what I really appreciated. You guys aren't kind of boxed into a single topic. You find really interesting conversations, and it's always fun listening to the back and forth between you and Thomas. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, so here we are to talk about Dennis Miller. This is an interesting one, as I said, because, we don't, mostly with cast members when they come into the Hall of Fame to be nominated, we've got a lot of sketches to go over. Dennis is not that guy. We have, he's one of the first ones to come onto the show who just does Weekend Update. You can say maybe Brian Doyle Murray kind of did it before him, but he was in more sketches than him as well. But we have a lot to talk about as far as getting him there, the state of SNL as Dennis was coming onto the show, and the state of Weekend Update, even more importantly, because that's his bread and butter. So, Deremy, where was your first introduction to Dennis? Were you watching at the point when Dennis was on, or did you come a little bit later?
I came later. So my first intro to Dennis was really in the 90s, his HBO show. And really just that unique point of view. And my dad used to really enjoy Dennis Miller's like stand up and just that cadence he has and that sardonic wit, So that's where I kind of saw him just in general and being on different talk shows. But growing up in the 90s and watching SNL live, I started right toward the end of the Sandler Farley era, but then Comedy Central replaying those reruns, I was like, oh, hey, Dennis Miller was on SNL, and seeing him on that, I've heard you say it many times, that second golden age of SNL and being, doing his Weekend Update. And I'm like, man, how important he was to SNL and how important he was to Weekend Update. And I think there's a lot of things you can debate about with Weekend Update. Who's your favorite, who you didn't like. But I'll say it here. I think he's the most important person to do Weekend Update, in my opinion. Like, he may not be, I don't think he's my personal favorite, but I think if I have to rank him as number one, like most important for that whole franchise of Weekend Update, I'm starting with Dennis Miller.
Yeah, I mean, great points. And, if you look at it it's hard now because of time has passed. He's not affiliated with the show anymore. He's kind of gone off the rails in some people's minds as far as, where he stands on things. But I always go back to the 25th anniversary where it's him Chevy sitting at the desk and Dennis enters and basically they're talking about how they're the two most important Weekend Update anchors ever.
Wait a second, baby. I only did one season. I did 6. I mean, you might have knocked her up, but I married her. I spent more time behind this desk than Kubrick did in the edit bay, spanking at the dailies from Eyes Wide Shut.
Wow, it's good to see you, Danny. It is Danny, isn't it? Yes. Incidentally, George Carlin wants his beard back after the show.
And this is 25 years into the show. We've had a lot of people at this point. And I think he makes the joke of, well, you might have knocked her up, but I married her. So,
yep.
And that's true, like in a lot of regards. As you said, like he is probably the most important because let's start with where SNL is as he comes in season 11. So, Lauren has come back to the show after 5 years away. And Dick Ebersol, for all the good things he did, and the Eddie Murphy and the Joe Piscopo of it all, does not regard Weekend Update, Saturday Night News as very important. He always kind of puts it on the back burner. There's not a lot of politics that he wants to talk about. And the 5 seasons between Jane and Billy finishing up that first golden era and Dennis coming on to the show in season 11, there were 18 different people that hosted Weekend Update. Mm-hmm. For $1,000 in the dinette set, can you name all 18 right now?
All 18. I know Charles Rocket did it.
Right.
I know Brian Doyle Murray. I know Mary Gross. I know Brad Hall. I'm trying to think who I'm missing here. I know because Brad Hall did it, and then Chris Guest.
Those are the big ones. So yeah,
Christine Ebersol, I know, was on it.
Yeah.
I can't do all 18.
No, I know. I had to look these up, and I've known these people for a long time, and I still had to look up. I mean, they had a point where they basically fired Brad Hall from the desk and started putting the hosts in there. So the hosts were hosting Weekend Updates. So you've got Bob Uecker, you've got Don Rickles, you've got Billy Crystal playing Fernando doing Weekend Update. Like, it's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and it's in a lot of disrepair. So, season 11 comes along. Dennis is one of those people that's hired. What do you see when you see him coming into season 11, watching some of those clips from that first year that he's on the show?
Well, I think first it's kind of, I look at the mind of Lorne, and I know definitely with the 50th and the book that came out, there's been a lot of talks on Lorne and his legacy and his approach. But I think that's what is great. Lorne's coming back, and he is going back to those original years and saying, I'm bringing Weekend Update back. And I think this is one of the more unique hires, honestly, that Lorne's ever had, where he pretty much looked at Dennis Miller and said, can you be my newsman? Can you do Weekend Update? And I think that's because Lorne, being a writer himself and kind of probably watching Dennis, and I'll give Dennis Miller this as a stand-up, he can definitely craft a joke in that unique way. And you're hearing his voice, his style, where it's like, nah, that's really no one but Dennis Miller. So I think Lorne liked that, and credit to him for seeing, you may not be a sketch guy, you're a stand-up guy, but you can do the news for me, or the fake news for me, as we like to say. But honestly, we've seen like how tumultuous season 11 was. And a lot of times we look at it and we say, well, John Lovitz, Nora Dunn, they made it. A lot of people forget it's Lovitz, Nora Dunn, and Dennis Miller made it to that next season. And Dennis Miller was a highlight, along with John Lovitz, but he was a highlight of season 11 in that awful year. Mm-hmm. And the way he kind of brought Weekend Update back and was doing his, I like to say, he was cool, but not in the same way as the original cast cool. He was cool in that it seemed like he didn't care if you laughed or not, and he was speaking truth to power. And I think that's what like kind of brought Weekend Update back under Dennis, was he didn't care what you thought. He was going to say how he felt.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, we'll talk about this as we compare him to other Weekend Update hosts. I think the best Weekend Update hosts we usually get have this kind of stand-up background. So you've got, Chevy, Norm, Che, like these are the people that are on everybody's lists as far as best Weekend Update anchors of all time. Mm-hmm. Because when it's not done as the straight newsman, as opposed to there's a better way to craft a joke when you're sitting at that desk. You don't want to be Dan Rather. You want to be the funny guy. And I think that Dennis really is the first one to do that since Chevy. And the other thing that I think is, it is interesting, and I would love to have been a fly on the wall, not to plug another podcast, but how it came to be that he was not in sketches. So this doesn't really happen. If you look at the show now, Che and Joe starting in stuff. Seth kind of moved away from sketches as he went to the update, but he was still in stuff. But this was a brand new idea for this just to be a standalone piece with this cast member. And I think Dennis really killed it.
No, I agree. And I think probably to Lorne's credit and everybody during season 11, if they're like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If this is one of the few highlights of this terrible year, why are we going to mess around with this guy and try to move him all over? Let's keep him there. And he kind of was really finding his way. I think I heard that Herb Sargent was around, and he would kind of do, and I'm going to age myself or age my comedy knowledge, kind of like a Mort Saul thing. The comedian Mort Saul, yeah. I know you're with me, Bill, where Mort Saul used to just kind of do stand-up. He'd read the paper and kind of comment and do jokes while just open up a newspaper. And I think Herb Sargent and Dennis Miller kind of figured out that's the way his mind kind of worked. So he would just kind of like hold up the paper and read out articles, and Dennis could quickly kind of like just craft up some stuff, and they could like narrow it down. So I think really it's a credit to Lorne's management, but also Dennis's skills as well, like to not mess around with this guy and let him do his thing and not try to like force it,
Yeah. And as you said, season 11 is a mess. One of the documentaries they did recently with all the 50th stuff was about the weird year in season 11. And it's all true. It was a mess. But the three people you mentioned, Lovitz and Nora and Dennis, that carry on to season 12, it's a really key kind of point in the show's history that they stick around. And then in season 12, when things really get cooking, we get Phil Hartman, Jan Hooks, Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon. So those are the big names that come in. We start the second golden era, and Dennis is behind that desk. And yeah, he's got this thing about him. And as I said, with the stand-up part of it, it's really important. One of my favorite comedy albums of all time is his Off-White album. It came out after he was on the show, so he was doing some of the jokes that he had already done, but there's a lot of key jokes in there that he was able to bring to the show. It was almost as if he was honing his stand-up set by sitting behind the Weekend Update desk.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that people may not know, which before Weekend Update, he wasn't the most political in his humor. But I think through Weekend Update, and then you saw that shift, and to your point, it kind of morphed into a stand-up. And then from then on, so for the last 40 years, we've seen that Dennis Miller with those old references and really talking about the news of the day and just kind of honing his style. But it really came from Weekend Update. And I think credit to those who were working on it with him, like I said, Herb Sargent and different other people, to kind of really help Dennis hone that style, but bring Weekend Update back, which I always will keep saying, like, we're so used to it. I think, viewers of the show, like now, who don't know, like back then, it's like, no, there was a time where maybe Weekend Update wouldn't be here. And I think SNL would have looked so different without it.
Could you imagine today not having Weekend Update? Yeah, it was really, really, I mean, let's be fair. There were good moments in season 6 through season 10. You've got Kaczynski's correspondence pieces, and obviously Eddie doing what Eddie did, Joe Piscopo's Saturday Night Sports. So there are moments that are good. But I think the point is, the anchor was not there. There was nothing and staying away from the politics as much as Ebersol did, by the time we get to Lauren, and Lauren wants to bring politics back, that really shaped me personally. I mean, I was a young kid, but I was already kind of a politics nerd. And, covering like the 88 election and things like that. So you had these great cold open pieces that they were doing, but then they were also covering on Weekend Update. So getting the Reagan jokes in there. I think one of the most famous ones was when he talks about Reagan's 75th birthday.
Like, I was going to say that. Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's okay. Just he talks about Reagan 75, and he has access to the button. He's like, my grandpa turned 75, and we don't let him press the remote. It was just like something like that.
Yes.
It was just so great, like how he timed it. And I always remember that joke because I'm like, not to hope no one takes offense, no ageism, but I'm like, that's kind of true a little bit.
Right.
That's got a good point. But he kind of nailed it, and it's just that kind of classic, like sarcastic Dennis way.
Yeah. And the sarcasm is a key point of Dennis, but the arcane jokes are really key too. And I know that most of us didn't get them. I certainly didn't get them at the time, but like he would reference like these rare, like 1600, art pieces, things like that. I can't even remember most of them because they were just so off the rails. But he had a way about bringing up something that nobody knows about.
Well. And I know, not to put words in your mouth, but you probably loved Norm. I loved Norm.
Yeah.
He was my first Update guy that I watched live. But we kind of always give him credit for really seeming like he didn't care if the studio audience laughed or not. And he didn't, and he was great. But I think Dennis was like that. And Dennis,
100%.
And whether he cared on the inside or not, who knows? But when you watched him, it seemed like he really didn't care, and he was going to use those old references. And if you got it, you got it. And if you didn't, you didn't.
I don't know if he's guilty or innocent, but I do know since he got his haircut for the trial, Oliver North looks a lot like Jay North. And if anybody knows what that means, call me.
So another big part of what Dennis is able to do, is he has this repertoire with almost everybody in the cast coming on and doing correspondent pieces. Now, again, it's hard in modern SNL to think about this because most people go on to update at some point. Most of them have, you've got the Sarah Sherman versus Jost. You've got Leslie Jones versus Jost, Ego versus Che. So there's a lot of really good, back and forth these days. At this point, it was more cut to the correspondent and then go back to the host. There wasn't a lot of back and forth. And I think Dennis brought that to another level with some of these. Do you have any particular people that you liked seeing at the desk with Dennis?
I'll be honest. Not the biggest Victoria Jackson fan I'm just keeping it just to her as a cast member. And I don't know if that's such a credit to Dennis as well, but the only times I really ever dug her on the show was doing those correspondence with Dennis.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, the I'm Not a Bimbo song.
These women have set back the feminist movement 20 years, and I, for one, am outraged.
Victoria, I cannot believe you're outraged with your image.
What are you saying, Dennis? Just because of the way I look, just because of what I wear, just because of how I act and how I fix my hair, you think you can label me.
Or even just that meltdown she had, which was some great acting where she's like, I can't do this anymore. And she got real intense and took the wig off and had another wig on and was just so serious. And I forget what Dennis says, but she's like, shut up. And she gets really, and it's like, okay. And I think just how Dennis was, his kind of wise ass demeanor compared to her bubbly, it kind of just worked. And the only times I ever really dug anything Victoria Jackson did was that correspondence with Dennis on Update. No offense to anyone who's a Victoria Jackson fan, but I wasn't. I didn't get it, honestly. Maybe one of Lauren's stranger hires, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But she was okay with Dennis.
Yeah, she was a square peg in a round hole. I don't think that's unfair to say that she really, for this era that had so many heavy hitters, she was definitely the weak link. I don't think
By far.
Yeah, and that's a great point that he kind of elevated what she was able to do, and he did that with everybody. I think getting to see Kevin Nealon find his voice on the show, doing Mr. Subliminal or News from 10 Feet Away was a big thing. Obviously, A. Whitney Brown coming on and doing the big picture stuff.
Yes.
Another political thing that really kind of hit for me as a young person. John Lovitz doing The Annoying Man and Tommy Flanagan.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's a lot of good ones here.
And I mean, Dana Carvey, who for me is a top 5 cast member of all time. But one of my favorite things, though, ever was I think it was his second time doing the dentist impression. I think it was season 15, and he does the laugh with it. He's in the darker suit and that he just nails it. And I've always thought about that. I'm like, man, he really does have that dentist cadence down, and he has the whole head bobbing and everything. One of my favorite bits from that era was when Dana would go on and do Dennis, right with Dennis.
Absolutely. And I'm going to age myself even more, but I can remember the internet starting because I am that old. And I can remember you just kind of search for random stuff because there was no Google. But I can remember coming across this GIF of Dennis and Dana and Tom Hanks. So when Tom Hanks joins the third one and they're just bobbing their heads and singing the Christmas song. But yeah, those Dana pieces, I mean, this really cemented Dana because we hadn't really seen it. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think we had seen a parody or an impression of a cast member, and certainly not one who was still in the cast. Now, these days, you do see it a little bit more. We've seen a Kristen Wiig impression after she left. We saw Jimmy Fallon do Dennis Miller when he was on Monday Night Football. But at that point, for it to kind of be so upfront, knowing what he was doing, the head bob and the cheat chew. Okay, babe.
Okay, babe.
And Dennis sitting there going, I'm just narcissistic enough to like this.
Yeah. I think that's what was great though, Bill, is how he responded to it. He kind of just played it straight and just was like, okay, to like the craziness around him with these correspondents. And I think that it probably can get overlooked very easily because we're looking at whether it's Lovitz or Victoria or Kevin or Dana coming on and they're striping it. But through him, you see the importance of the host of Weekend Update and how they play it goes along with it. Just like, as great as Stefan was years later, we love seeing Seth with it as well. Like it was that whole thing made it fun. But like we really, to me, get that with Dennis in his era.
Yes, absolutely. And it continues on. Dennis stays for 6 years and he starts to usher in the bad boys. So we get the first Sandler pieces. We get Spade's Hollywood Minute. So it's not just that second golden era. We get it to see all the way to the very end and the end of his 6th season where he's bringing these people on. And it's come out over different podcasts that he was advocating for these guys. They weren't getting stuff on the show. Spade was just kind of, a buoy in the water. He couldn't figure out what to do. And he found a way to get him on Weekend Update and get him to do a piece that made him pretty famous. So very important part. Yeah.
Yeah. And he would advocate for these guys to get on the show.
Yeah.
Him being a stand-up, he advocated for Spade. Dana knew him for so many years. He advocated for Sandler. So I think that's a huge part of Dennis's legacy too, is he had the ear of Lorne where Lorne trusted his opinion on these comics, but he got them on the show. And you hear a little bit through a mix of he did kind of suggest things to them, but he also hazed.
Yeah.
You can hear that he was like that tough, like critic of the newcomers, but kind of did help people in his own way get comfortable and establish who they were on the show.
Yes, absolutely. I think it really is an interesting thing to see how Dennis was able to do what he did for as long as he did it. He's for a minute the longest running cast member. He goes 6 seasons. First one to do that, I believe. Yeah, because Lovitz had left after 5. He does usher in that era between Reagan and Bush, the Iraq War. So there's a lot of key moments that we get to see him at the desk. And I think it's really interesting to see what he was able to do at the desk.
No, absolutely. And I think that's true too. Like he kind of showed, if you look at those first, I'm just kind of going off the cuff here, but like those 5 years in between when Lorne was gone and where we were in the early going into the mid 80s. And then when you get with Dennis and what society is like when you get to like the later 80s into the early 90s, and we're starting to get that we're rebelling against that, Reagan in America. We're kind of upset with what's going on with, from George Bush and reading my lips, no new taxes and all that, and people, the recession of the early 90s. So he's kind of ushering in that a lot of viewers are starting to change, and we're getting a new generation of viewers who are kind of, it's not the happy-go-lucky 80s, it's like we're the pissed-off 90s. Like he kind of brings that with it.
Yeah. And another point I want to bring up, because I think this is important, we talk about catchphrases a lot with SNL. Obviously, you've got so many people in the cast, but I can tell you from when I was in high school, Dennis is one of those people we quoted. Like he gets, and it might be the first one since Chevy, as far as update anchors, where he has his "What can I tell you" to open the show, and then the whole scratch in the paper. I am out of here. Like, can't tell you how many times we would do that in class. Like if, we were ready for the school year to end or we were ready just for the day to end, I am out of here. Really key. It's not up there with, pump you up or isn't that special, but I think that kind of helps too.
Oh, absolutely. That was popular. Like just the way he came on, and the I am out of here with the whole pencil writing on the script and like out there, like people knew that. And I think, and Bill, if I'm crazy, like let me know. I know you will, but like it's kind of, we think of that time for late night and we look at like late night with Letterman and how like he was cool for being like a wise ass, for being sarcastic and like poking fun. But like if you look at it, Dennis comes on in '85. Dennis kind of was doing that too in late night with Saturday Night Live, and doing that wise ass kind of comedy that, like I said, it was different than like the cool of the '70s, which was like, that was like, look at how like fashion and like we're just badass and rebellious in that way. But Letterman had it. Dennis Miller had it where it was cool to be the wise ass. It was cool to be smart and show your smarts. And I think that's something that we still to this day give credit for, like Late Night with David Letterman. And I'm not saying Dennis deserves as much as Letterman does, but I don't think he gets that credit also.
I think that's a great point. I think it is the rise of sarcastic stand-up comedy, kind of taking it in a different direction. And yeah, that's such a great point. And I'm a huge Letterman fan as well, so I can see where that kind of gets from A to B there. Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about some of his sketches. I know we said there's not a lot to talk about here. Most of these are not a Dennis Miller highlighted sketch. There's other things going on. But is there any sketches that stand out to you, Deremy, that you want to talk about with Dennis?
Yeah, I like the It's a Wonderful Life sketch.
Yeah.
And honestly, Dennis is a big part of that. And that's one of the all-time great holiday sketches in SNL history.
Hartman. Oh, Harry! Hello, George. How are you? Welcome home, Harry.
Merry Christmas, George. Now, wait a minute, everybody. I've got a telegram here I want to read. From London. Dear George, stop. Mr. Gower cables, you need cash. Stop. My office instructed to advance you up to $8,000. Stop. Hee-haw and Merry Christmas, Sam Wainwright!
It's a longer sketch, but I think it's for that second golden era, it's one of their better sketches, and Dennis is in it. And just seeing how that sketch flips at the end, and how like it's funny, but like how intense that is. And like I said, Dennis does play a big role in that sketch, which honestly, for the Not For Ready project, that podcast, we did I know you've been on that, the tournament talk.
Yeah.
And the first one I was on, the holiday sketches, and rewatching that, I hadn't seen it in a while. I forgot that Dennis was in it.
Yeah.
And then he's so prominent in it. He's like he's not just like a little like talking like one liner. Like he's a big part of it. And I'm like, man, I forgot Dennis Miller was in this sketch, but it was cool to see him in it. And that's one of the few times you do get to see Dennis in a sketch.
Yeah, that is one of the best, absolutely, as you said, Christmas sketches that they ever did. The beat for beat that they do. Obviously, you have some incredible performances. You've got Dana in the Jimmy Stewart role. Jan is amazing in the Donna Reed role, even mimicking her facial expressions. But yeah, Dennis is a big part. People forget how small the cast was at that point. So you only have 8 people in the cast.
Right.
So when you're going to do these huge pieces where there's all these different people, I mean, there's extras all over this sketch. So obviously they're going to pull in somebody like Dennis because they're like, listen, we need we need a body here. And he gets to do, it's not an impression per se. He's doing the brother Harry, but like it's important to the part. Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that means something because they could have gave him something small and just have him in the background, but they chose to feature him prominently.
Another one that I like, which I think kind of gets lost in the mix, is the stand-ups. So he does this. They do this 3 times, and it's kind of based on Seinfeld before Seinfeld was famous. And they're all, it's him and Lovitz at different points. Damon Wayans is in one, Dana Carvey's in one, Tom Hanks. And it's all about like, hey, did you ever wonder how, airplane peanuts, and it's just all of them backstage doing their thing.
Hey, did you ever think about those coffee tasters in Colombia? Hey, what do you mean? I mean, hey, what do they do on their coffee break? Work for 15 minutes? I want to know. Hey, what I want to know is, what about Mr. Coffee? Who does he hang out with? Mr. T? Yeah. And who does he bowl with? Mr. Cup of Soup? Yeah. And hey, guys, Why do they always say, fill it to the rim with brim? I mean, hey, if you fill it to the rim, it spills when you drink it.
Hey, maybe they should say fill it almost to the rim with brim because I don't want a lap full of Joe.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people know Jerry Seinfeld for the show, obviously, right? But he was a prominent stand-up throughout like the 80s, and I do think he brought in a wave of comics who were mimicking him, doing like, you ever notice? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Like he did kind of, and so it was kind of cool to see, like, before Seinfeld was a big thing, I think they were mocking, in my opinion, like though that Jerry Seinfeld's not a hacky comic, but those hacky comics who were kind of copying him and like, you know, doing that. So I do remember those, and I did like that, like, especially as a fan of stand-up, because I love the art form. For those good ones or those great ones, you're going to get a lot who, no offense, I give them credit for trying, but they're swing and a miss. Yeah. And I think that's important that they can kind of poke fun at that too.
Yeah, there is something to, you know, Seinfeld might have been one of the first ones to do that, and kind of the photocopying of, you know, his act, and everybody kind of jumping on that because he was getting pretty big even before Seinfeld, as you said. And yeah, them all kind of having the same routine behind stage. They're not even on stage; they're just behind,
right?
And they're still telling the jokes. And think about like easy listening music. You know, what's easy about listening to Ray Conniff? Like such random stuff to be talking about. Who does Mr. Coffee hang out with? Mr. T? But it's all very hackneyed, very silly. But it's an important part, and Dennis has a prominent role in this. So I think this is a big one to point out.
Which is, I think, huge because Lorne in those original years, I don't think anyone really, maybe Chevy tried it, but like none of them were stand-ups. They were improv guys. So I think this was big. Lorne, when he comes back, he gets Dennis, who's a stand-up guy, but then that next wave where you're getting Carvey, who did stand-up, and Kevin Nealon did stand-up. So I think that was huge, you know, which I give credit. I look at Eddie Murphy as and you know, Piscopo as well, as the OGs of those guys to do stand-up, but Dennis is like right behind them because we think of SNL, rightfully so, as an improv game, but there's stand-ups who are prominent, and I think if, starting with Eddie, but if Dennis and then Dana don't come on and do their thing, do we get Sandler? Do we get Spade and Rock and Schneider and those other guys he just goes back to the Second City way only?
And very true. And all the way through today with people like Longfellow, Pete Davidson.
Right.
Yeah, that is a great point where you don't have a lot of people that had done stand-up. It was very much an improv-based show. Even though the show SNL wasn't improv-based, it was, you know, having that background. So this was kind of the ushering of a new era in that regards too. Are there any other sketches? I know there's a couple more, but I want to see what you got.
Obviously, the infamous the penis sketch, which Dennis still defends. He says, "I don't see why it was so controversial," and I hear him on it. It definitely is. I don't know about you, Bill. I don't see it as much as I did. I used to see it more on like retrospective things, and now I feel like I don't see that sketch as much, but that was definitely one where it's very memorable to that era, and Dennis was a part of it.
Hey, guys, you want to see my pictures from Barbados?
Yeah, sure.
All right, there I am with some friends on a catamaran.
Penis looks great.
Yeah, here I am playing tennis with my dad.
Hey, you've really got your dad's penis.
Yeah. And by the way, Jack, what have you done to your penis? It looks super.
I go to this place in Long Island. They do great work.
Yeah? You got an address?
Sure. Give it to you.
Yeah, I'll write it on my penis so I won't forget it.
Yeah, I think the reason we don't see it as much because I don't know that it translates as far as shock value. So, you know, you're talking about the early 90s, and the one you're talking about is Nude Beach. They say penis 40 times plus. And, you know, it's all behind this background of like this tiki bar, so you can't see. the important bits, and and it's Matthew Broderick and Dana and Kevin, and Dennis is a big part of it. And it's just the nice penis, Bob. you could pick a lock with that penis, and so it's just kind of an excuse to push the censors, I think, where today I don't think it's as much of an issue. There's obviously still things you can't say on network television, but it always reminds me of the South Park, where they decided to say shit like 200 times in an episode, so they were pushing the boundaries, even though that was on cable. This was a precursor to that. So kudos to Conan and all those that were involved with writing this one.
No, absolutely. And I think it's a great point by you. Like, it loses its value, but I think it's good to show that, to being like, this is where we were at in society at this time, where it was a big deal to say penis 40 times.
Right.
Like, that was like, whoa, like, and like, had some controversy with it too.
It definitely
did.
Yeah.
Big up to everyone with that, and Dennis was a part of that one.
Yeah, maybe the most meaty role for Dennis in a sketch was and I don't know how much you like the sketch. It's certainly not one of my favorites, but it's important to point out the adventures of Coco, Mishu, and LeBay. And
not one of my favorites either.
No, it certainly is interesting to look back on. They're just these sad clowns, and they did pieces like this at this point in the show. But Dennis is playing a clown named Coco, and they're kind of traveling through the woods. What do you remember about this one?
That's really what I remember. I remember that. I remember it's always the shock value of seeing Dennis. When I look back all those years, I'm like, oh yeah, Dennis is in it. But I remember it was one that just was a hit and miss for me. And you're right, it was very meaty for him, but I kind of didn't see the bits. Like, I didn't see what was so good about this one in the bit. And it was kind of one where I'm like, I'll be honest, not that everyone's sensibility is different, but that was one where I go, how did this get on? Like, what was I would love to have been, like you said, no pun intended, a fly on the wall, to be like hearing the pitch and being Lauren, let's go with Coco. And I'm like, really?
Right.
Like, it just didn't. And honestly, I think maybe it could have landed better. I know we're here to talk about Dennis for the whole, if like Dennis wasn't so prominently featured in it. Like, I think you needed a little better performer, honestly, than Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, there's other standouts. I think Jan is great in this as kind of she's reading the story as it starts to play out. One of them has Paulina Poroskova, which, was a big get for the show. She was a supermodel. And to have her on in a cameo role in a couple of different sketches, this was one of her big moments. But yeah, I always wonder, because I know there was a joke, we didn't talk about this, but he liked to do these kind of self-effacing jokes sometimes at Update. And he'd be like, I've got this new impression. And this is, I can't even think of a name right now, but he'd be like, this is, James Woods walking it. No, I'm not going to do that. And he would just kind of, zig when you zag. But he mentioned Coco the Clown early on in Update. And I wonder if that kind of became a seedling for deciding to turn this into a full sketch.
It might have been. Maybe it was planting that seed there. It could have been. That's an interesting point. I just thought, because you're right, Jan does do a really good job, and was a phenomenal actor.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think like there's things on the show that, like Update, where you need that person who's a stand-up, and there's so sketches where you need that person who can really act and really get into it. And Dennis wasn't an actor; he was a comic, and I think that's why he wasn't bad on the It's a Wonderful Life skit. Like, that's why I kind of like, he's not bad, because he does, for him, some okay acting, But I think the Coco sketch, I don't know, I would have liked it much more, but I think if you needed someone who could really sell it better than what Dennis could.
Yes. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. We kind of wrap up his time on the show. Season 16 comes to an end. He gets cold open. He gets to say live from New York. Like, this is a big one. Now, even though it's not true, he's kind of set it up for us, Deremy.
It's one of my favorite Lorne like bits, honestly. But it's Dennis's last episode, and he's they're kind of backstage, and he goes up to Lorne, and Lorne's like, Dennis, so this is your last show? He's like, yes, 6 years has been great, and Lorne's like, really, it's your last?
Yes, this is it.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
You're not going to come back every week and hang out on the set like Lovitz, are you?
No, I'm really going, Lorne.
Because that would be really pathetic.
No?
I mean, the man has no life.
This is definitely my last show.
I mean, thank God every now and then he gets a movie.
Yeah, well, I'm serious. This is it for me.
Well, okay. Is there anything special you'd like to do for your last show?
Really?
Anything, Dennis. You name it.
Well, I've always wanted to say live from New York. It's Saturday night.
Well, there's the camera. Be my guest.
Live from New York. It's Saturday night.
That was great. Well, we're going to miss you, Dennis.
Yeah, I'll miss you too, Lorne.
Well, time to start the show. Live from New York. It's Saturday night.
I just love it. That was great. So anyway, and of course, Lorne gets to he does the live from New York. But I thought it was one of my favorite Lorne bits, like for him being on the show. He was really funny. And the fact that it's live from New York is Saturday night. And that was great. But I can see Lorne, that's how Lorne would handle it. Like he lets you feel like you're doing something, but then he takes the power back anyway. Like, no, I'm in charge. You're not doing it.
Yes.
So that was great.
Yeah, I can remember this episode because him and Jan were both leaving. So two of my favorites are leaving the show. So it was hard. It was my first kind of losing people that were part of my crew. And I mean, he does. It is kind of a mislead because he says he never got to say live from New York. He did get to do it once in season 11, but there was no internet back then, so you couldn't necessarily go back and look that up. But there was no Saturday Night Network to say that this was the second time he said it. But yeah, it is. It is a really great moment, and I think it kind of shows Lorne's love for Dennis, that they do have this moment kind of carved out. It's way before they start kind of giving these going away parties to cast members when they leave the show. They kind of just fade away. And this is one of the first times that we kind of get, a goodbye to somebody who's going to be leaving the show. So, yeah, this is a great way for Dennis's SNL career to end. And then, we got to talk about his post-SNL career. You brought this up at the top, and this was a huge moment for me. Like, Dennis Miller Live was so big. And I can remember I was in college and couldn't afford HBO. So my sister would tape Dennis Miller Live for me on her VCR and then bring the tape over to me on Saturdays so I could watch it. Yeah. And, it was such a great show that he would pick one topic, and it ran for a long time. It ran 9 or 10 years, and he, had all these different guests on. He had this opening where he would talk about not wanting to go off on a rant. He made a whole meal out of that. He made books out of that and things like that. So you said you remember watching Dennis Miller Live.
Yeah, and to me, I think that's a great point that you're bringing up is how big he was for a while. And I feel like that's the sad part of him not being on the 40th or the 50th is Dennis Miller was one of the bigger comics post his SNL career, maybe even at the end, but throughout the 90s, he was on. It was a big deal to be on HBO, to have your own show. And honestly, I remember it's those rants, and then when he would get other people to come on and kind of like that talk showy kind of feel, it was. I want to say it was Bill Maher before Bill Maher.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Really, it was real time before, and I know Bill Maher had Politically Incorrect and stuff too, like before, but he was doing that before Bill Maher was doing that in a way, honestly, and really talking about the day and kind of showcasing comics. I remember Norm, one of my favorite Norm guest appearances is when he was on there, and I think Norm was ripping David Spade really bad one time on there, like with David being right there, he just tears him to shreds. It was a really cool kind of talk show, and it was different, obviously being HBO, and it wasn't I love Letterman just like you, but it was like a different spin on that, but a different free form. We look at it now, like I said, Real Time, Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, all those shows that came after, but you can really look at what Dennis Miller did with, Dennis Miller Live as like leading the charge. And I think I'm glad we're doing this because no matter how you feel about him, he was important and he was innovative in a lot of ways that he's not getting credit for.
Yeah, he falls through the cracks for many, many different reasons, I think. Obviously, the passage of time, not being a part of the show for so long. Obviously, his politics are divisive and things like that. But yeah, there is not just a moment, there's a decade after he leaves SNL where he's important to the culture. Not only through Dennis Miller Live, he does the first two ESPYs, the ESPN Sports Awards in 93 and 94. He hosts the MTV VMA Awards twice in the 90s. He does a lot of like prominent ads for like M&M's, 1010 220 if I'm really dating myself.
No, I remember. I'm with you.
But,
I'm with you, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, he even does. You mentioned his acting not being the greatest, but come in, Bordello of Blood. I mean, what a great movie that is, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I don't know why people aren't talking about that now, Bordello of Blood.
Yeah, I mean, they should have had it on the Oscars the other night. But he does. He has this really big moment, and of course, there's one more big tentpole that he gets at the beginning of 2000s, Deremy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you remember, and I remember that was a huge deal. Now, was he good? No, but it was a big deal. Monday Night Football, Dennis Miller's going to be on it. And what that was the big talk in the off season, bigger than like a lot of like player transactions. It's how will Dennis Miller be on Monday Night Football? Because people, if you don't remember, I will say nowadays Sunday Night Football is bigger than Monday night. But if you go back from the 70s, 80s, 90s into the 2000s, Monday Night Football was the primetime place. So Dennis Miller getting brought on, and people were wondering, will he be a bust? Will he be the next Howard Cosell? Like, there was a lot of talks, and he wasn't that good, in my opinion. But it shows the names that he had, that they weren't going to give that to any comedian. You had to be one of the biggest comics out there, and Dennis Miller was.
Yeah, and going back to his arcane references, I think that was basically his downfall. Even though that's kind of why they brought him in, they wanted to find this intellectual level of watching football on the biggest NFL game of the week. As you said, this was key, having this Monday night and not knowing. Every year it would be who's Al Michaels going to be with. And, they went through a lot of different people. They expanded it to a 3-man booth to bring in Dennis. And yeah, it was not a great fit. I can remember morning talk shows that I listened to on the radio at that point would just break down his, ridiculous references. And,
he was bad. Yeah.
Joe Sixpack sitting there watching, Cowboys and Giants doesn't want to hear that. And I get that, even though I was excited for Dennis, it definitely did not work great, but it was his last kind of hurrah in the big spotlight.
It really was, and I think that was a downfall. And I think maybe he kind of was like, he had his run. He did do radio for a while, and which I think kind of shows his talent and why. When I heard him on the radio, it showed to me why Weekend Update he was so good at it, is because like. I did radio, and that is like, you have to be really good with that stream of consciousness, especially when you're on for hours and having to talk. Like, you have to be able to just kind of let it flow, but it still connects. And he did it for a long time and was pretty good at whatever the topics were, pop culture. Now, if you agree with him or not, different story. But Dennis Miller was good, and I think for me at that time, it was showing. Well, that's why he was so good at Weekend Update. He could kind of just let it flow, that stream of consciousness on the go. So he did still kind of stick around for a while. He was on the radio. I remember hearing like he would get Lovitz calling in or Dana Carvey. So I always liked those SNL reunions on it. But yeah, it seemed like you're right. Monday Night Football was kind of like the tailspin for him, even though that was a big deal. Like, it kind of, after that kind of flopped out, it was like he kind of went away, honestly.
Yeah, I think with the politics, and again, like you say, wherever you fall on the spectrum, that's not really the point. He really took a hard stance where before you kind of knew where he stood. At some point, I know he referenced like 9/11 and that kind of changed his politics. You can believe whatever you want to believe, but his conversationalist, the way he was able to talk, as you said, was still important to being able to what he wanted to do. And I know when he's stuck to SNL, when he's been given the opportunity, Spade had a show on Comedy Central about 5 or 6 years ago that he was on quite a few times, and he was great on there. And I know when he's been on the podcast with Dana and Spade, he's been great. And I love hearing his voice again when talking about SNL. And he gives it its proper due, talking about his time on the show, talking about the people he worked with. So, pretty big deal.
But Bill, maybe I'm off. When I remember him on SNL and even like Dennis Miller Live, I felt like I couldn't nail his power. I felt like he kind of took shots at it both sides.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
which is what I liked.
Yeah.
I felt like he was going to go after Republican, Democrat, left, right, whatever. Like, he was down there. And then I'm getting mixed reports of like certain people, and maybe I'm not saying they're lying, but they're like, I'm not surprised. He always showed that. And I don't know, maybe because they know him, like you knew it, but like as a fan, for the longest time, I didn't know where his politics were, and I like that about him.
Yes, well, yeah, and his time update, you're talking about Republican presidents, so of course he's making more Republican jokes. But when, as you said, like when he's on Dennis Miller Live and Clinton's president, he's making the Clinton jokes. He's not holding back. He's not, but I prefer that with my comedy, with my people like this, to not necessarily know where they come down. We're in a very divisive time, so I don't think that's as possible as it once was. But you had about 15 years where that's such a great point, that you might not have known where he came down because he was making an old Reagan joke. Doesn't mean he's not going to make a Clinton blowjob joke. So I think that's really kind of important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I wish, at least like you said, now it's very hard. But I wish for a little bit longer he would have kept that going.
Yeah, me too.
I think that would have helped, because getting ready for this episode and talking with you, he deserves a lot more flowers than what he gets. Like, and I believe in giving flowers, whether you're a personal fan or not, you got to give due. And I think about like what he did for Weekend Update is the equivalent of what Dana Carvey did, him doing Bush, did for like presidential like impressions. Like, Chevy did, Ford, and you had Danny did, Jimmy Carter. But when Dana did Bush, he established that, SNL from here on out, we're going to have someone doing the president, and we have to address, like, especially during an election year. Like, Dana established that, and to me, Dennis established that. Yeah, we kind of had Update before, and we have the Saturday Night News, but from Dennis on, Update is here to stay and is an essential part of the show.
Yes, 100%. And as I said at the top, like, if you were talking about this after SNL 25 as opposed to SNL 50, he's top two. There's not even a question. There's no debate. It's Chevy and it's Dennis. And the way they portrayed it at that anniversary special, and kind of, obviously you have Norm coming in at the tail end of that. But these were the two people who really cemented Weekend Update's legacy. And I think, as I said, the passage of time has hurt Dennis. Never mind the politics. The fact that you've had people like Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Che and Jost. So there's been so many people that have come since Dennis, and he has not been on the show. He was not, as you said, not at the 40th, not at the 50th that we know of. And I think that's kind of a shame, because he is so very important to the history of SNL.
Yeah, and I think it's just funny because there was a following for Norm when he like was on it and when he got fired, and there was like oh, don't fire Norm. But it's interesting how Norm's legacy with Update has grown. Even before his passing, it grew over time where I'm like, it wasn't this popular in the moment. like his firing was popular, like made some headlines, but the way people, I just love Norm on Update. People who didn't watch it, I go, it was pretty divisive because he wasn't doing jokes for everybody.
Right.
So a lot of times people would be like, you had people who liked it and there were a lot of people who couldn't stand it. And I'm like, it's funny how you're right. In 2000, it'd be clearly, oh, Dennis was over Norm. And now 25 years later, it's like everyone's Norm over Dennis.
Yeah, that's very true. I know my father and I have talked about it. He'll call me and tell me that he just watched a bunch of Norm Weekend Update stuff on YouTube, and he's like, nobody's laughing.
Right.
That's a great point. Like, yeah, he didn't care. He did not care. There was no applause button going off. It was up to the audience, and sometimes it just didn't hit with Norm. So yeah, it's the trajectories are very interesting to look at.
Yeah, it's just funny. It's like, man, who would have thought it would have flipped where I'm like, I didn't think anyone. Norm was very divisive. And I'll be honest, I don't like, God rest his soul, Don Ohlmeier and how he handled. But on certain things, I understood where he came from. The show was getting kind of off the rails. And whether his personal relationship with OJ had a factor or not, he always said no. I think it had some of a factor. But like, I could understand Norm's jokes for SNL being what it was, even at that point, and you're trying to hit all of America. Norm's jokes were definitely not hitting anywhere close to half of America. So I could understand having those concerns, to be honest.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there is something to the OJ narrative. It's kind of grown and exploded over the years, but I think there is something to the fact that, you know, if you're an executive sitting in that room on Monday morning and you're looking over the SNL show from that weekend and you're not hearing any laughs for 10 minutes and Norm's just referencing the fact that nobody's laughing and not caring, it didn't necessarily translate, especially to an executive. But yeah, as far as Dennis goes, I think we've covered the swath of his career on SNL.
Right.
Deremy, what do you want to say to Hall of Fame voters, those around the water cooler? Kind of make your final pitch for Dennis Miller getting into the SNL Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so I think we've seen it over the years how popular Weekend Update is, and everyone has their favorite person, their favorite time, especially over these past 30 years. But you don't have that without Dennis Miller. You know, the reason why I went a little bit on Norm here, there was a reason why I did that. It's because in a down time on his era, his Weekend Update, I feel, suffered because the show was suffering a little bit too. Where, to Dennis's point and his credit, when he comes in on season 11, the show is getting slammed, but yet he's a bright spot along with John Lovitz. People were talking about, which is very hard to do, to stand out for Weekend Update when the show's getting slammed. And then guess what? When we get that second golden era where you get Phil and you get Jan and Dana Carvey, Dennis is right there. And I think we always look at, there's two big eras that saved the show. The first is Eddie Murphy with, and Piscopo with Dick Ebersol as the producer. And the second wave is what Bill and I said, that golden wave with, hey, you say Dana, Kevin, Jan, Nora, and you got to mention my man, Dennis Miller. So this is a person who helped save SNL. He not only helped save Weekend Update, but helped save the show. And I think anytime, either behind the scenes or in front of the camera, if you have helped save the show, you should be an automatic Hall of Famer. So I think Dennis Miller, based on saving Update and helping to save the show, should be an automatic Hall of Famer.
So there's that. An absolute automatic in the Hall of Fame, says Deremy Dove. What do you think? Shoot me an email at the SNL Hall of Fame at gmail.com. I would love to know what you think. And hey, we are getting into the thick of things here. This is the 11th episode. We've only got a few left before we get to the Don Pardo Award. We get to our annual nomination roundtable. And then, of course, the finale. So get those voting pencils ready, listen to these episodes, and make your choices. You have an unlimited number of choices this year to select from, and you best make good use of them to help Deremy's prediction come to life and have him, Dennis Miller in this case, although Deremy Dove should be inducted into the SNL Hall of Fame as well. But we're talking about Dennis Miller here, the guy who epitomized cool for me when I was younger. And he's got my vote. He's got my vote. It's going to be interesting to hear what Joe and Shari say this coming Thursday on the SNL water cooler. But for now, let's dig in. And, this is a real showcase for Dana Carvey, but it also showcases, the quirks and affectations of Dennis Miller so well that it actually transcends a typical impersonation. And I love when SNL does this and has the actual person there for an impression. I think that's a lot of fun. So let's go to this right now. This is from Weekend Update, and this is Dennis Miller with Dana Carvey, and I hope you enjoy it.
This being the beginning of my 5th season, I felt it was time to reaffirm my Weekend Update oath. Assisting me in that oath is none other than me. Hello, Dennis.
Okay, hello, baby. How are you?
All right. Repeat after me. I, Dennis Miller.
I, Captain Hairdo.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
To keep a vigilant eye on the social and political leaders of our time in the event that they disappoint us.
Yeah, to keep an eye on pinheads like Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. What's with these cretins? Let me tell you something, folks. I would sleep with Jim Baker before I'd sleep with Tammy Baker. What's that all about, huh? It's got to be like doing it with the Joker from Batman.
And I'm just narcissistic enough to love that.
Keep it rolling, Chicho.
To never put myself or my career before the news.
To milk the mock humility thing if I see any career advancement in it.
And to keep an eye on the figures in the world of entertainment in the event that they start to take themselves too seriously.
Yeah, like when Zsa Zsa, the goulash bitch, whacks Officer Poncherello from Chips. Yeah, how old is this dame, huh? She's had more tucks than a bed at a Ramada.
And guess what, folks? That's the news, and we are out of here.
Oh, that is dynamite. That is so dynamite. And I forgot that Miller often ended, or not often, typically ended Weekend Update with a real track. And that was The Lunatic is on the Grass. That comes from Dark Side. Yeah, great song. At least that's what I heard. Did I hear it incorrectly? Send me an email. The SNL Hall of Fame at gmail.com. I hope you enjoy yourself this week. I had a great time, and really want to thank Matt Ardill. Really want to thank Bill Kenney. And of course, I absolutely want to thank Deremy Dove for stopping by once again and just delivering the goods. It's nice, the crew of guests that we have on this show and the caliber of talent that they bring. I'm so thrilled for that. But with that, I bid you adieu for another week, because that is all I've got. Now, if you would do me a favor, and on your way out, as you pass the Weekend Update exhibit, turn out the lights, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNLHOF. This is Kirk Lane saying, this is Kirk Lane saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.